Okay, so we are on page 2 of the percent change notes. So I'm going to get those started. So the first part was the actual note piece with the formula. You do want to make sure that you know the formulas going in. So then this next item is that this idea that the base we're using for a percent is very important. And I said it again. And the reason for that being is if you put it over different bases, that difference, that absolute difference is going to look a little different. So a lot of times you could kind of use the version that's going to make whatever you're trying to say look the most appealing. So again, the base tends to be the than word. And the base, when I'm saying that, is the piece that's going to be on the bottom, that old piece. So we've got this percent change formula. And for the first example, I pulled this directly off your homework. So you'll see something similar. And it basically describes two companies and their sales. So we have one in Seattle selling 330,000, the Portland branch selling 230,000. We're going to compare their sales in a couple different ways that make it sound a little different depending on that base. So for this first piece, Seattle sales were what percent larger than Portland? That means that you're comparing Seattle to Portland. So your base or your bottom of your fraction bar is going to be Portland. We're trying to see how those difference in sales compares to how Portland did as a whole. So for that one, our formula would be the Seattle sales minus the Portland sales over Portland. That's my base piece. So it's the than, indicating my base. So this is saying how much bigger are Seattle's sales than Portland. So if we go and do this one, Seattle was 330. Portland was 230. And we're doing that over Portland. So the difference is 100,000 over 230,000, which if we divide that is about 43.5%. I did one decimal because it asked for one decimal. So if you're the Seattle branch manager, you're now saying we did 43.5% better than Portland. However, if you're Portland, you may want a slightly different approach. Well, hold on, our sales were only this much smaller than Seattle. So the than now means that we're going to compare Seattle. So for our formula down here, we're going to flip it. It's going to be Portland minus Seattle over Seattle this time. So that top part doesn't matter how I flip it. There's a difference of $100,000 here, and you take the absolute value. The difference is now the base. So this new fraction is about 30.3%. So that sounds a little better if you're Portland. Hold on, we're only 30% smaller than Seattle, or Seattle saying we're 43% larger than Portland. So that base really makes a difference. Now, how I'm getting these answers is they're coming out as decimals. And then I'm being careful with my rounding. So what I'm doing on each of these, because they're asking for percent, is I'm changing them to a percent, which means multiply by 100. And then I'm being very careful to round to one decimal. All right, so we've got these two versions. So you have your Seattle branch manager saying we're 43.5% larger than Portland. Portland is saying we're 30.3% smaller than Seattle. How about just a direct comparison? This is a direct Portland to Seattle. This one says just do a straight. What is Portland to Seattle? Okay. So that's 230 divided by the 330. That's going to give me 0.6969 repeating. So I move my decimal 69.7. So the actual Portland sales are 69.7% of Seattle's. So again, watch for that base. And then the last item I want to talk about is when we're talking about quantities that are already measured in percentages, we have to be careful how we describe them. So this one says a politician's support increases from 40% to 50%. Describe the change. All right, so we've got two items here we can do. We can describe it as absolute change, which was our one formula, or we could describe it as percent change, which is going to get a little bit interesting because it's already in percents. So for this one, we're noting that it did increase, but our big kind of note here is that the units are already in percents. So we need to be careful how we describe it. So the absolute change would be that it went from 40 to 50, which is a change of 10. And it increased 10%. So I don't just want to say it increased 10% though, because 10% of 40 is 4. What I want to say is it increased by 10 percentage points to really drive home that fact that it went up 10, not just 10%. So that's my caveat, be careful with that. Percent change then is then again, it didn't go up 10%. It went up the difference of 40 minus 50 over the original, which is 10 over 40 or 25%. So it would be incorrect to say this went up by 10%. You could either say it increased by 10 percentage points or increased by 25%. All right, you are now good to go on homework 2.